Hello friends, in this video we are going to take a look at the overview of API builder module within APIwiz. We'll go through how we can manage and create workflows, various modes within workflow creation, how we can change, create new revision, change the status of it, as well as the configurations. So to start off, on the left hand side, once you access API builder on the left hand side, you get a list of all the workflow. Now, before we go ahead, let's create a brand new workflow. In order to create a workflow, you have to click on this plus button. Once you click on this plus button, you get a simple placeholder workflow with a request node and a response node. In order to add any of the other nodes, you just have to click on this plus icon. Once you click on this plus, on the right hand side, you get a list of all possible nodes that you can add in the workflow. For now, based on my requirement, there can be multiple responses. So let's add another response that can be possible in this workflow. Here, once I click on the node, at any point, I get an option to either put it in parallel or put it in series. So let's click on parallel. Now I have created a workflow which has two possible responses. Now I can go ahead and add more conditions before each of this response and build my logic. Let's take a look at now how we can remove a node from the workflow. I just have to click on this menu and click on delete. So now that we are back to the start, let's take a look at how we can configure the request. Once you click on the node, you either get to upload your own API. It can be an REST or a GraphQL. Second option is about Design Studio. APIwiz has its own Design Studio which lets you create API design. Once you select the Open API specification, the type of API, you can click on this one and select any of this design that are already designed in the API design module. So let's take a look at banking KYC, revision. Here I can select any of these resources. Let's select a customer ID. Once I select, I can go to the next, which will create and configure the node. You can also start blank if you don't have any API design. Once I click on next, here you get basic details of the API. Here you can configure the name, method description. Since the name is generic and it is also the same name for the workflow, I'll put this is the customer ID API. I've put all the details. You can enable tracing. Once enabled, it can trace each API hop. If any of the API call goes through this API, it will appear in the API traces. Next is API logging. Once you click on this, all the input fields and the traffic will be available to look at in the API logging section. In case you happen to select the API logger, you have to select the index, which is a group of logs or views, environment and virtual host for it. Details of this API logging are provided in the API logging playlist on this channel. You can also select the default environment and virtual host. Once you select that, now you can go to the next step where you can configure the request. Since this is a request node, you only have options to configure the request. Before we go ahead, let's understand this section. Extraction is a way where you can save a data field inside the header as a value. In this case, customer ID is the value of this first parameter. Let's save it as capital ID in curly brackets. Now I have used this variable to extract this value. So now I can simply use this value anywhere in the workflow whenever I want to use this customer ID. Next is schema validation. Sometimes there are certain mandatory headers required for validating the execution of proxy. You can mention those headers here. After this, you have security. API security once enabled, you can select a rule that applies to this workflow. A deep dive into the policies and the rules is mentioned in the API security playlist. But as an overview, it is simply a rule that is applied to this workflow for every traffic. So if I go in this one, fail to parse request body is a rule. And if I select it and go back, I have selected that one rule. Now for every call, this one rule will get applied and checked. Now in the next section, we can mention that what will happen once this rule is violated. So when threat has come or the rule has violated, you can either choose to continue or terminate the execution. In this case, I will terminate it. And you can terminate the execution with a status code. Here I will put a bad request. But not only that, you can also put a header and a payload value which will be helpful for troubleshooting for the user. In this case, I can create a new header which gives more information about the kind of rule it has violated and what to do about it. I can also pass similar values in the payload if I am blocking this or terminating this execution because of the policy violation. For now, for simplicity, I will disable this API security and click on save. Now that I have saved the request, I can go to the response configuration and click on this. Here you just have to simply name the response. Since this is scenario, this is the only scenario, I like to name it based on the outcomes. Like this, there can be multiple scenarios in a workflow. So this is scenario 1 response. Either you can use headers to return a value or use payload. Here I will simply return the ID that I got it from the request. And since I have selected JSON, it has already added the application JSON in the header, and click on save. Now that I have configured this, let's move ahead and deploy this API. Before we can deploy, we have to make sure that this is in the approved state. For multiple users, you can go here and view revisions, put this for review and click on change status. Now, since this is in review, the manager can come and click on approved and click on change status. Since this revision is now approved, I can click on this deploy button here. The API name and revision is already there. I can select a host, which there are 3 options. So I can select the dev and banking environment and click on deploy. Once I click on deploy, I can see that it is deployed here. I can click here to undeploy it. Now that this is online, I can go to the run tab and send my value as a request. So this is my customer ID, for example. I can click on simple run. First, I have to select the virtual host. So I'll select the virtual host. As soon as I select the virtual host, I get to see a curl here. Once I put the curl, I can copy this and use the API client of my choice to trigger this request. For now, I will just trigger it from here. For running, you can just simply click on this. But for advanced workflows, if you want to track every step of the execution where there are multiple nodes involved in the workflow and you want to see everything that has happened in each flow, you can click here and click on run with event. This is more comprehensive run, which not only just gives the request and response, but also tracks every step and data transformation and exchange between each node of the workflow. For now, for simplicity, I'll click on run. As we can see, we get a response and a request here, and we have got a response code of 200. Okay. Next is event. So let's take a look at car insurance quotation and click on events. As soon as I click on the events, this is the list of all the historical transaction of the workflow called car insurance quotation. I can click on any of this transaction and I get an overview of the entire workflow. At the bottom, I get to see what are the execution steps. This is the level of tracking that will happen if you click on run with events in the previous screen. Each step, I can see that these are the APIs involved in this workflow. The car insurance code, get manufacturer detail, get registration detail, all of them have returned 200. And on the right hand side, I get to see what are the details or the time duration required for each API call. I can see the most amount of time is taken by the car insurance code. Here you get 2 little icons that will help you know the compliance status for each of this call. So let's take a look at the car insurance detail and click on the I. As we can see, the response body here is non-compliant. Non-compliant means the request or the response of this API call is not following the intended behavior as mentioned in the API design. Since I see that the request response body is non-compliant, I can click on response body and see that the object instance has property which is not allowed in this schema. So you can see the messages why it is not compliant. Like this, I can go to any of the other APIs and click on to the I icon and see the non-compliance. Here I see that the header is non-compliant and the 3 headers that are non-compliant, the reason is given here. I can also go to the security and it will give me the basic details of the transaction, why it is violating these policies. So this transaction that I clicked on, it is violating 1, 2 and total 4 of my security policies. Now security policies, how we can define them, the deep dive about it is mentioned in the API security module. But I get an overview of what are the things that it is violating. The next thing for any transaction in this execution log is the data. What is the data that got exchanged during the execution? So for this node, I get to see what were the header that were given, as well as the body or the response that it gave out, and how it was utilized in the execution of the workflow. This is the view, and I can again go back to all the rest of the logs. I can switch between different virtual hosts, search something here. If I want to search from a specific IP, if I want to search for a specific host or an agent, I can do that here just by clicking it and putting the name. By clicking an agent and putting the name of the agent here. Next, I have the details or the time filtration. I can click on refresh at any point to see what are the time ranges that I'm looking at. Lastly, we get the basic config. Here we get a source control configuration. You can put all these details here and save your configuration to the source control. Environment also you can maintain just by clicking on this button. You get different environments. Their values you can save here. Once it is ready, you can click on select environment and it will be applied as a default for that workflow. Next, you can click on this button and create your own certificate that you can use. Virtual hosts are the servers. You can create multiple virtual hosts and click on this button to make it online or available for use. As we can see, Acme Data, Dev and Agent are the three already in use. Lastly, the deploy option that I already showed, you can click on this undeploy to make any API offline. Now that we have done this demo, we can go ahead and click on this delete. So that's it for the overview of API Builder within APIwiz.